Welcome, Wargamers. My name is Doug from 2 Plus Tough, and today we are going to be doing a review of the Start Collecting box for the Soulblight Gravelords in Age of Sigmar. Now, when I do these kinds of reviews, typically what I do is we'll kind of do an overall look at what you get for your money at the price point, and then kind of go through each unit, war scroll by war scroll, kind of explaining what they do on the battlefield, what you can reasonably expect from them, and then we'll dive into a discussion about the overall value of the box when it comes to actually starting to collect an army. Essentially asking the question, is this a good place to start? Because sometimes the answer is not really. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The Start Collecting Soulblight Gravelords box comes with 1 Wight King on skeletal steed, 5 Black Knights, which could optionally be built as Night Haunt Hex Wraiths, and 20 Graveguard. Now, from a bird's eye view, just by looking at this, I try to put myself in the position of a new player at the Games Workshop store for the first time. They're looking at the big wall of armies, and I gotta say, this is a really cool set of models. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I believe right now this is the only way to get the skeletal steed version of the Wight King. I could be wrong on that. Maybe they did come out separately on its own. I just didn't see it. But that model is terrific looking. For anyone who's a fan of like necromancy and the undead as a whole, you look at this box and you're like, it's just a whole bunch of skeleton and undead stuff. Like, there's a leader, there's a couple of units with him. It's 26 models in this thing. I love it. Also, a fun fact, the Wight King on skeletal steed, if he's your general, then the Graveguard become battle line, which means, and this is a big deal for me when I do these kinds of reviews, the format of having a hero and 2 battle line options holds true. So you can have that unit of 20 Graveguard be 2 10-man units. They're actually really good in 10-man units. And then essentially have like a starting list. You would probably need to buy 1 or 2 more kits. I mean, like kits, in quotes, probably just a hero model or something like that to round out to get up to like 600-ish points so you can start like a path to glory. But in terms of like the kinds of units they put together, this is a great start for building a list. It's playable in matched play right out of the box. Though I do want to add here, though, I just feel like for being the Soulblight Gravelords box, it is missing an actual vampire. So, and that's going to come up later towards the end of the review, but I feel like it was just missing that one little thing to make it like super spicy. But now what we're going to do is head over to the shared screen and just walk through each and every one of the war scrolls involved in this box. Kind of not so much giving you a competitive sense of what it is, but if you were to go out and buy this, what can they really do? What are their strengths, their weaknesses, that kind of thing. And we start off that discussion with the Wight King on skeletal steed. He has a movement value of 12, 7 wounds, and a 3-up save. That's actually a fantastic save in this army, by the way. A natural 3-up if you do any kind of mystic shield or all-out defense. Going to a 2-up is utterly terrific when you're talking about skeleton warriors, which tend to kind of crumple into dust a bit. Don't always have the best saves in terms of a death army, but certainly they take care of their heroes. So 3-up save is wonderful, and one thing you're going to see consistently across all these units is a bravery of 10. Now, it's kind of hard to overstate how important I think that is. There is a ability in the game where you can like do a heroic recovery, where your heroes heal up. And so having a bravery of 10 is important because when you make that recovery roll, if you roll less than your bravery, you heal D3 wounds. And so having a high bravery stat is really, really good for some of these smaller heroes. And as between that and the what could easily be a 2-up save, he can be fairly survivable. I mean, more so than some of the other heroes we see like in, Night Haunt, where they have a 4-up that can't be modified and like 6 wounds or something like that. Now, moving into his weapons profiles, he actually has 2, and this is pretty typical for anyone riding any kind of mount. You have the actual person's weapons and then the mount itself, and they are, in the description here, kind of separated, so like if you get an artifact, you can't put the Sword of Destiny on the hooves and teeths of your mount. But that's okay. So let's take a look here. He has the Tomb Lance. Range 2, very important. I love range 2 weapons. They're just melee weapons in general that have longer range is just awesome. Only 3 attacks though. 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. And that's a great weapon profile, to be honest with you. I mean, he's not going to be a combat god. Realistically, when you're putting it in the context of the army, one of the things the Soulblight Gravelords do exceptionally well is using their heroes to have like aura buffs all around the units near them. And so just the fact that he is more survivable than some other heroes, say like the Necromancer or something like that, he is incredibly mobile, and he can take this bubble of, I believe it's called the Deathly Minion Save or something like that. Basically, every time a wound would go through on a Soulblight Gravelord unit, you roll a die on a 6, the wound's ignored. So essentially, he can be this little bubble that moves it around, and because of his speed stat, he's wonderful. So again, you know, I say that, interject it here, because he's not going to be the most killy and fighty. That being said, he's pretty cool. So moving down here to the hooves and teeth of his mount, 1 inch range, 2 attacks, force to hit, force to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. That's pretty consistent amongst every single horse style mount. Like, I mean, my Chaos Knights are the exact same way, unless you have a unique creature like a Carcadrek or Manticore or something like that, or Zombie Dragon, I suppose. Your mounts don't do a ton of damage. Although, conversely, more often than not, I feel like my main attack always whiffs. Like, I just can't roll anything, and then the horse always does more damage. I don't know why. If you feel that same way, go ahead and leave in the comments. But looking at his abilities down here, we have some other cool things. Deathly Charge does incentivize him to be able to do some stuff if he can get into combat. So Deathly Charge is, after this model makes a charge move, you can pick one enemy unit within 1 inch of this model and roll a dice. On a 2-up, that enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Now keep in mind, this would be during the charge phase, and at the end of the charge phase, if you were to, say, charge the Wight King at the same target as you charged anything else that has the monster keyword, you can do the Deathly Charge for a 2-up on D3 mortal wounds, and then during the monstrous rampage part of the charge phase, the other things can do the same thing. So essentially, he acts like a monster that's locked into that one, you know, monstrous rampage ability. Which, again, you know, it's not a lot of damage. No, he doesn't get any bonuses to his, you know, Tomb Lance like other similar units do when they charge. However, if it is late game and you just need to run over and just clear a few guys off an objective, think something very cheap, could be some Ungor that popped up mid-game, it could be demons that were summoned in, whatever it is, he can charge in and at least proc D3 mortal wounds pretty consistently, and then deliver, you know, some reasonable amount of damage with a D3 damage lance. So the potential late game to be able to just kind of chip away a few models and maybe take an objective because he's a hero is still there, and I think that's important not to overlook. Sometimes it's easy for folks to kind of get into this mindset of like, well, I have to protect my heroes, and it's like, nah, man, like last turn, late game, you throw everything on the table, and he has some late game abilities. Now, he does come with a command ability, which I always love when these lower level heroes come with a command ability inside the box, if for no other reason than helping new players learn how they function within the game. And this one, I actually want to point out, has an FAQ, so what you're seeing on the screen is actually inaccurate. I will explain the FAQ to you here. What it says is, Lord of Bones. Use this command ability in your hero phase. If you do so, pick one friendly death rattle unit wholly within 12 inches of this model. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with melee weapons by that unit. Now, that sounds awesome, except for the fact that it happens in your hero phase and no one would be able to fight and use this ability. They did FAQ it to where it's at the start of the combat phase. So again, at the start of the combat phase, when you know which units are in combat, whatever, you can basically just pick a unit and they get reroll hit rolls of 1, which is a tremendous ability given that most things in this game went to +1 to hit rather than reroll. So this is actually a crazy good ability. You just got to be aware of that FAQ, because now you have more flexibility. You don't have to choose which unit gets that buff in the hero phase, and they can actually use it because then they'll be in combat. So there's a lot more freedom there. It got a huge buff with the FAQ dropped, and so I think that's terrific, honestly. We're going to talk about some units here at the end that can really benefit from re-rolling ones, because my goodness, there are some doozies. But for now, we're going to move on to the Black Knights. Now, I think that this inclusion was a wonderful way to make like a cool full collection of like skeletal steed units and having a cool like hero and his little entourage of black knights with him. They can keep up with him at a movement of 12. They only have 2 wounds each, which I learned recently in a game. I honestly, for the longest time, thought they had 3. But 2 wounds apiece at a 5-up save. Again, you can tell what I mean when I said earlier that the 3-up is a tremendous, powerful save stat compared to a lot of the stuff in the Death faction. And of course, they always have Bravery 10, undead stuff, and demons always do. For their weapons, they have the Barrow Lance, which is a 2-inch ranged attack, 2 attacks, 4 is to hit, 3 is to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. So kind of a wet pool noodle, if you will, as far as weapons go. And then the hooves and teeth of their mounts, pretty much identical to the the Wight King on Steed, which is the 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 4 is to hit, 4 is to wound, no rend, 1 damage. Now, one model in this unit can be the Hell Knight, which is just the unit champion. And the reason I think that pointing out the champion is important is 2 reasons. 1, he gets an extra attack, so that's important. But also in Age of Sigmar 3.0, if a unit has a champion, it can issue that unit orders, or commands rather. I kind of get those 2 words mixed up a little bit. But essentially, he can do things like he can declare all-out attack for his own unit. Meaning, they can be a bit more independent so long as you keep that Hell Knight alive. Now, in addition to that, they also have a Standard Bearer and Musician. The Standard Bearer is very interesting. You can re-roll rolls of 1 for the Deathless Minions battle trait for this unit while it has any Standard Bearers. That's the ability I was talking about earlier, the Aura effect, that allows many Death Rattle units to basically, on a 6-up, they don't take damage. Well, now they have a way built into their actual War Scroll to re-roll 1s for that. And then there is the Musician. So while this unit has any Hornblowers, charge rolls for this unit of less than 6 are treated as being 6. So essentially you're saying you're never going to make less than a 6-inch charge. So that is a reliable charge range for them. Of course you can go further, but you'll never go less than. And that actually provides quite a bit of movement control once you kind of get used to it, right? Once you kind of set your lines up, you can kind of count on the reliability of always having a 6-inch charge. And that is quite nice. Now, they also have the Deathly Charge kind of thing, where it's after this unit makes a charge move, you pick 1 enemy unit within 1 inch of this unit and roll a dice. On a 2-up, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. Now, keep in mind, it is by the unit. So if you have a 5-man unit of Black Knights charge in, the whole unit, no matter how many enemies you touch, is getting 1 roll, right? It's 1 roll no matter how many Black Knights are there, how many charged in. That being said, this does stack with the Wight King on Skeletal Steed. See, his is the exact same wording, but it comes from a different unit, a different, basically, instigator of that ability. So if you were to charge the Wight King on Steed into a unit, they would roll to see if they take D3 mortal wounds, and then if you charge the Black Knights, they do it again. So, again, I'm just kind of clarifying that it's not on a model-to-model basis in this unit, it's just the unit as a whole for the Black Knights and Wight King on Steed, respectively. Another thing to note about these guys is they have the summonable keyword down here at the bottom. If you're playing Soulblight Gravelords, that keyword is immensely important because that means you're allowed to heal them with heroes or bring them back from the dead or place them in the battlefield with gravesite markers, those kinds of things. And so it can be an immensely powerful keyword to use. Not so much for the Black Knights. As far as like my honest thoughts on them, they don't do a lot of damage. They can be really good at running up and maybe pushing or tying down an enemy, pushing back to claim an objective, all these kinds of things, harassing, backfield units, that kind of jam. They're not killy. Like, honestly, you look at that weapon profile, they're not going to kill a whole lot of stuff. That's for our next entry. But they do have a purpose on the battlefield when it comes to tying down enemies and projecting threat into your opponent's deployment zone because, frankly, people don't expect skeletons to be fast. 12 inches is a fantastic move stat. And lastly, we have the Grave Guard. Now, it's important to remember, you get 20 of these guys, and you can have them in 2 units of 10. And so this is going to be probably the most different stat line within this set. So, movement of 4. Which is soul crushing. You only have 1 wound each, with a 5-up save and of course 10 bravery. Just as a stat line, not super impressive. They're slow and they die fairly easily. Keep in mind they do have a Deathless Minions roll if they are near a hero, or a Gravesite Marker. But as for their weapons, they have the Wight Blade. Range 1, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. One model in the unit can be the champion, and if you'd like, the champion can take that second weapon profile at no additional cost, and that one is 1 inch range, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, -1 rend, and 2 damage. So you kind of take a hit with the to wound roll, but you get increased damage. That's totally up to you. Honestly, I probably, for the sake of simplicity, just stick with the Wight Blades all around, but I understand that there's a lot of reason people like having their champions have a really cool weapon. Now, just like the Black Knights, they have a Standard Bearer and Musician that do the exact same thing. So the Standard Bearer gives them rerolls of 1 for Deathly Minions battle trait, which is phenomenal on a unit of up to 20 or 30 guys. And then the Musician lets them make sure that they never kind of charge less than 6 inches. But their abilities are really where they shine. So, for example, Cursed Weapons. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with a melee weapon by this unit is 6, the target suffers 1 mortal wound, and this is important, in addition to any normal damage. Most of these abilities that kind of proc a mortal wound, do it instead of, meaning the attack sequence ends, once you roll the 6s, you take those dice out of the pool. The fact that they get to have the mortal wounds in addition to a profile that has rend, and you know what I mean, like this has a fairly good stat line, is phenomenal. And that's why the Graveguard, quite frankly, they cost quite a bit in points, because they can wreck somebody's day. They certainly wrecked my day when I was playing against Graveguard here last week. And the last one is Crypt Shield. Add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target a unit armed with Wight Blades and Crypt Shields. Now, I want to point this out here. I kind of goofed up a smidge. A unit of Graveguard has any number of models. A unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: a Wight Blade and Crypt Shield, or Great Wight Blade. So there is a two-handed Mega Sword option for everybody. It's not just the hero. What my personal preference is, so if you go with the sword and shield method, you get the Wight Blade up here and you become a 4-up save. That makes them very reasonably tanky. I think the only thing that could have made the Great Wight Blade probably more interesting is if it increased the range of the weapon. That way more guys would get to attack to make up for the bad wound roll and that kind of stuff. Truth is, my personal opinion, sword and shield for these guys, they're not going fast anyway. When they hit like a truck. They are summonable, so you can bring them up multiple places in the battlefield. I feel like the Great Wight Blade, it costs a lot, right? Between the wound rolls not being great and it keeps your save at a 5-up instead of a 4-up, I don't know. But certainly go ahead and play around with both options and let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you play these guys quite a bit. But here we have a unit, right? You get 20 of these guys total. Again, small 10-man units are wonderful. You're not going to take battle shock tests at that level that you could ever really be afraid of failing them, unless there's some, very specific bravery shenanigans going on with your opponent's faction. What I would say is this is one of the best units in the army. I mean, they're certainly not the cheapest. You'll see a lot of competitive players use skeleton warriors because they're so bottom barrel cheap and you can throw a whole bunch on an objective. But this unit's a hammer, okay? When they get into combat, that to hit roll of a 3+, if you go all out attack, which they have their own champion so they can give themselves commands, becomes a 2-up. If you choose them with the skeletal steed Wight King, and he can give them reroll hit rolls of 1, you can already see a 2-up rerollable with a 3-up to wound is fantastic when it comes to the maths hammer of all this stuff. They can wreck someone's day, like just straight up. If you stack other abilities, like say Van Hel's Dance, which is the Necromancer ability, which allows them to attack twice in a combat phase, again, they don't lose the rerolling ones until the end of the phase. So they hit like a Mack truck when they get there. They are just this looming, I don't know, sword of Damocles just over the head of the battlefield. And so you have to kind of pay them attention. And that to me is why I would typically go with the Crypt Shields. The more that they can endure with that +1 to their save, the longer time they seem scary on the battlefield because they survive. So coming together for some final thoughts on the box, or putting it all together as sort of, I guess, in the context of the army, this is truly a box of like chumps, meaning there's no vampires in the box, which is kind of a lot of what folks are getting into Soulblight Gravelords for. That being said, the units you do get are exceptionally powerful in terms of so if you broke it down into 2 units of Graveguard, you would get 3 summonable units, Black Knights and 2 things of Graveguard, and a hero that is very useful because he's able to move the aura buffs of deathless minions around. So that is fantastic. Soulblight Gravelords uses a lot of summonable units, and so having this on the shelf, you know, you can kind of just snag it, boom, instant reinforcements, you're good to go. Is it the most competitive set? I don't think so. In terms of skeleton warriors being so cheap, you are going to want a whole bunch of those. They have a wonderful new model kit out that I highly recommend you check out. And honestly, the great thing about the skeleton warriors and the Graveguard is they complement each other well in the sense that they have a lot of the same keywords, and so they all take buffs like a frickin' champion, right? The only unit in this box that I'm like very lukewarm to cool on is the Black Knights, just because their role, and I do think they have a role in the army, is just so specific. You know what I mean? Like just a harassing unit trying to run and flank and all those kinds of things. Whereas the Graveguard are much more intuitive. They walk forward and they blender things, right? Again, they take buffs like a champion. So do skeleton warriors. Vampires are the same way. Once you kind of start building your list with vampires, you will begin to see they're pretty awesome. So while the box itself, you know, there's a lot of things going for it because it does come with a hero and 2 battle line. You can play it right as it is. Once you start filling the list out with maybe a vampire and then a bunch of like cheap troops, you know, again, skeleton warriors or zombies or whatever your choice is, you know, wolves. There's a lot of really great choices for just filling out chaff, which is what Soulblight Gravelords are really great at. Once you start doing that, you'll start to see the real strengths of things like the Graveguard, because once they're no longer your frontline unit and they have the chance to pick their combats and that kind of stuff, man, you can be real good with them. And so at the end of all of these reviews, I essentially ask 2 questions, okay? Do the models represent the faction well? Meaning, are you going to buy this box and be surprised by what the rest of the line for them looks like? And secondly, are you actually going to use them, right? Like, you can start here and think that these are cool, but once you start playing full, you know, say 2,000 point Gravelords lists, are you actually going to use these guys? As far as aesthetics go, do they represent the faction? Part of it. I mean, Soulblight Gravelords is an amalgamation of a lot of different little tiny model lines. So, for example, do they represent skeletal stuff? Oh yeah, this is a fantastic set if you like skeleton warriors, right? If you're just like a necromancer in D&D and you want to play a death army here, this is a no-brainer. It's great. I do feel like it misses some of the things that attract me to Soulblight Gravelords, like the regalness and all these things of the vampires and how their little aristocracy looks on the table as they're bickering with one another. I feel like it lacks a bit of that simply because it doesn't have a vampire kit in there. But again, that's going to be your first stop probably for purchases, so it's fine. So I do think you won't be surprised when you play the rest of Soulblight Gravelords. I just don't think it does enough to really stick the landing when it comes to the aesthetic theme. I think if there was a vampire, maybe a zombie thing, I don't know. Or if they just made a second Start Collecting box that focused on the zombies, that would also be wonderful. Kind of like how the Seraphon have multiple Start Collecting boxes, one for Saurus, one for Skinks. I think this is a faction that would take that really well. Now, are the models that you get actually useful? When you have a 2,000 point army, are you actually going to use them? From the lists that I have seen online, and recently, Soulblight Gravelords have won some cool events. I would say generally yes. I mean, certainly when you're starting out casually, having the Deathless Minion save on a 12-inch move model, the Wight King on Steed, is really good. Like, it is legitimately good. Whether you're going to use him a ton when you start playing like full games, I don't know, because once you start getting into Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon territory, the math kind of changes on his usefulness, because they can also move super fast and they have a bigger base, so they can project that Deathless Minion's aura further. So there's that kind of stuff where it's like, you know, are you really going to use that? You can build lists that include him. Black Knights, again, they're very situational. They have a purpose, I think. It's just not an easy one to learn. I think certainly without a doubt, the most useful part of this kit is the Graveguard, because the overwhelming majority of the Soulblight Gravelords inventory of models, so to speak, don't have as reliable of a stat profile for doing damage. 3 up, -1 rend is amazing. Rend is wonderful. And being able to do stuff like give them rerolling 1s to hit, or charge no less than 6 inches, all those things are just fantastic buff components when you mix in things like all-out attack, command synergies and spells that allow them to attack twice, all those kinds of things. So I think there's a lot of game in the Graveguard. I think the skeletal steed rider, the Wight King, I think he has a lot of uses, certainly early in your collecting time, but I'm not sure about the full extent of it later on. And as I said, you know, the Graveguard can be battle line. Like, they're not naturally, but if your general is a Wight King, absolutely. And so that is a huge deal to me because, you know, one of the things that kind of puts me off from playing Soulblight Gravelords is I don't want like an army of like 200 skeleton warriors, just like a bunch of dudes that don't do a whole lot. This is a way to kind of build that same aesthetic, but it's a little bit more elite, simply because the Graveguard cost more. But what you're getting for that cost is a really fantastic weapon profile and that kind of thing. So it's a build option that exists. Is it the best? Probably not. Does it allow other people like myself who want to play Soulblight Gravelords but don't want to do 200 skeleton warriors? Does it allow us to try a list building and having a cool, you know, very compact or somewhat compact list that can deal a lot of damage? Yes. I can absolutely see someone wanting to play Soulblight and then looking at how many models they would have and be like, well, I could do this and make them more elite, and they take buffs just as well as skeleton warriors and zombies and all these other things. So I think that there is a lot of game here. Probably not going to win like a major event like a GT with Graveguard as your main infantry, but at the same time, it can really wreck someone's day. I got my teeth kicked in by Soulblight Gravelords, Graveguard specifically, this last week. So overall, I think you're going to use the Graveguard, yes. The Wight King on Steed, that one's kind of hand-wavy. It really depends on what you want to do with the Graveguard. Certainly if you want them to be battle line, it's a great choice. The Black Knights, again, are the only one that I'm like, I'm not so sure about, or at least take some time to learn how to use them well. But anyway, friends, those are just my thoughts. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you are a Soulblight Gravelords player, and you have tried the faction multiple times, let me know in the comments down below what you think of the box. And then, as always, I pin the most helpful comments, so you can let us know like next purchases, how to get the most out of Black Knights, your thoughts on Graveguard, and the Wight King on Steed. I'd love to hear your opinion on all of those, and this is just meant to be a video to help new folks kind of understand what these units do. So the more help that you can give new players, the more attention I would love to shower you with, so I'll pin that comment up. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.